Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to episode number 18 of the Savage Balance podcast. I'm briefly interrupting before the beginning of the podcast to say I talked for so long about this that it is now a two-parter. So the first part will come and I don't know how I'll edit it. Maybe I'll just fade away. Or maybe I'll cut somewhere deliberately and find a good place to cut it. Either way, this will be the first part. It's out this week. The second part will be out next week. So over to me. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode number 18 of the Savage Balance podcast. How you all doing on this Tuesday morning? If you're listening on the Tuesday morning, that is. If not, then any other day or time of the week, because the idea of a podcast is that it's up there forever, isn't it, really, in a sense? Although, what does last forever? Nothing has been proven to last forever. We don't know how long time goes on for. The universe is finite, and that's a good way to start a happy-go-lucky jolly podcast. To be honest, though, this isn't a happy-go-lucky jolly podcast. It's about some stuff that's going on in the news. I thought I'd try and make it vaguely topical, although I want to broaden it out beyond its topical nature because, well, one reason is I don't know enough about the topical side of it. Really, I'm here to learn about it. I don't know enough about it, but I am at least going to do this podcast in a nice warm little blanket. I've got a little blanket over my legs. I'm only here. I've got a nice warm, thick jumper on, and to record this, I throw a, a duvet over a clothes horse and sit in my cupboard. So I'm in a sort of closed cupboard with all my clothes behind me. But I've opted this time for a little blanket over the knees because, I've got very chilly legs. I'm wearing thermals, but that's all. There's nothing else. There's no thermals are supposed to go on underneath. They're supposed to be with something else. But if you just wear thermals by themselves, they tend to still get chilly. What are you on about? This is supposed to be about Trump's second impeachment trial, and you're shitting on about your fucking legs and the chilliness of them. That's what I'm doing. That's my style. As I said, this is sort of about, or at least in response to, Trump's second impeachment trial. It's Monday today when I'm recording this, so the news has come out really that Trump's been acquitted for his work. He was on trial because supporters of Trump stormed the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., on the day Congress was meeting to confirm Joe Biden's election victory. And obviously, as we know through history, 5 people lost their lives, and there was an impeachment trial, I think the first ever in US history for a president to have 2 during their presidency and also 1 after their presidency. And he's been acquitted for it. He's not been, I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was for inciting violence against the state, I believe. That's probably not the right wording, but I thought it's an interesting topic to talk about, but I don't really want to focus on the impeachment because, one, there'll be more information coming out during the coming weeks and months. And 2, I thought this was a good topic to talk about language and to talk about the idea, at least of the concept of inciting violence. So this isn't a podcast on Trump or the trial or anything. I'm using this as a platform to talk about the language of violence and using Trump as an example of the type of language that can cause this state in a crowd or group of people. You know, how the words that we use and the words that we are exposed to, what they can sort of create in us and what sort of actions they can make us do, such as storming the Capitol building and resulting in people losing their lives. Obviously, we all know that while in office, Trump courted and defended many sort of violent fringe groups and white supremacists, the stuff in Charlottesville and the KKK and the Proud Boys and QAnon. A few of these we'll get to talk about a bit later. But I thought a good place to start this talk and these ideas was to sort of have a look at Trump's speech. this is the main focus around the trial. So again, this isn't about the trial itself, but I'm interested in the language that he uses in general. And this speech is a really interesting one in terms of what happened just a few hours later. So, I think the interesting thing about this case and the interesting thing about the trial itself is that we can talk about the speech itself, but he was sort of priming his supporters to be in this kind of stance. And again, I'm not saying that he was encouraging people to do that to the building and to do that to the people, but for months before, he was telling his supporters the only way they'll lose this election is by election fraud, and that to keep your country, you'll have to fight. Fight is a word that will keep reoccurring, and fight is a word that has, physical connotations. You don't just fight verbally, do you? Fighting is mainly known, through wars that we see in movies. There's a lot of violent movies. Fight night. Fight night is a kind of boxing term. I think it's boxing, isn't it? People say I got in a fight. You know what that means. It's a fist fight. It's physical. So when you use words like fight, it conjures up physical connotations of like actual, like bodily movement and bodily usage. Fists come to mind. Great big fists, humongous, big walloping fists, smacking, just pummeling, just throwing and smashing and crunching. Faces of people and lambs and deers and all sorts of animals will get punched and smacked in the face. All right, I'm going to stop that there and just remind myself that I've got a lot of stuff to get through. You're recording this quite late at night and you want to get through it. So don't start talking about punching lambs in the face, because I don't think that's what Trump was talking about. Here's a few quotes that I picked out from Trump's speech. Again, this is a speech that happened a few hours before, just a bit of context, a few hours before when they were, I can't remember the name of the street, but anyway, they were down a long street away and they were going to march and protest outside the Capitol building. This is what, in fact, those are some of the words that Trump used as well. So let's start with, they want to take not me, but us down. We will never let them do that. You'll never take our country back with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. We will never give up. We will never concede. Concede is kind of, it's almost like a game. It's almost like there's a competitiveness to this. And I understand that politics and especially elections are competitive. But when you are combining it with words already like weakness and strength, and this idea of fighting, then it becomes more than just a game, I guess. Then it becomes more, in fact, I'll keep going. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore. We will stop the steal. Already claiming, this is definitely a steal. And our country has had enough. He's speaking on behalf of the people that he represents. We will not let we will not let them silence our voices. For years, Democrats have got away with election fraud. Again, this is one of the big statements that Trump will just say, a big sort of baseless claim, really. Sometimes I think, I don't want to get apolitical. And then if I was talking to a Trump supporter, you want to say, you want to talk to them maybe on their terms. But some things I think it's just fair to say aren't true. I don't know where, to say it 4 years they've got away with this, that's pretty scandalous. And I mean, in fact, I've already done a podcast, if you're interested, on reforming our political voting system. And I guess we touch a little bit on the stuff in the US as well. And in fact, there's links to it in the show notes of stuff they've written about that. But that's not the same as fraud at all. That's not the same. A sort of problematic system is not the same as fraud. And that is just a straight out baseless claim, which would obviously ignite and enrage a lot of supporters. It would enrage me if I thought that the thing that I cared about most was being stolen from me. It conjures up feelings of anger, of retribution. That's not fair. I want that back. You shouldn't have that. And if you have those tools in your grasp, then why wouldn't you? Let's continue. You have to get your people to fight. Again, there's that word, fight. We don't have free and fair elections. We don't have a free and fair press. It's become the enemy of the people. So stepping themselves in opposition, again, enemy of the people. This is something we're going to get to later with kind of that use of words like enemy, which, we'll definitely get onto later because it's really interesting from that point of view. If they do the wrong thing, we should never, ever forget they did it, making it, almost the promise of it being generational, that there is no reconciliation. There's no way back. If you've done this, if you've wronged us, we will carry this anger with us forever. You can clearly see a pattern of frustration and anger, and just this is the sort of language you might hear before some kind of physical altercation. Make no mistake, this election was stolen from you, from me, from the country. You will have an illegitimate president. That's what you will have. And we can't let that happen. There's definitely an at all costs vibe, isn't there? At all costs must this not happen. This has been stolen from you. To be so certain and to so sure, and to not have that proven in any way, to be that kind of dogmatic about it. This has been stolen from you. You have been wronged, and you shouldn't surrender. You shouldn't let this be taken from you. It's really interesting reading that all back and seeing the language actually written down and actually hearing it out loud as I'm talking about it. There were also crowds at points chanting, "Fight for Trump," the "fight for Trump, fight for Trump," the word fight again. I should also mention that he did say at some point, "Let's peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." So I think this played a key role in the trial itself, in the impeachment trial, which he was acquitted from. So that is really worth mentioning. But I guess that's why I'm not so much focusing on the trial itself as the language and using this as a way to decide the language. You can see the anger and the retribution and the violence. There's so much violence in that language there. But it's not just that one speech. The reason it's not that shocking is because we know this pattern of the way he talks through his whole career. There's endless examples. I think I saw somewhere that he did 30,000 lies in office while he was there, which is remarkable. Impressive as well, isn't it? That's good going. I think if you challenge me to do 30,000 lies over the next 4 years, I think I'd struggle. I don't know what rate that is, but if there's about 365 days a year, call it 300 lies a year. That's, a good, I think that's about 100 years of lying. If you did, nearly a lie a day, that's impressive, isn't it? That is high ranks. I couldn't do it. So hands up, hands down, well done for being an effective liar. Well, not an effective liar. I think the way he gets away, not the way he gets away, but the reason why he can go through so many lies is because he's not going for quality, he's going for quantity. If I can lie 30,000 times, then it's going to be really hard to pinpoint and pick out the really important ones. So good work, Trump, in that sense. I don't think I would have that dedication to a form of communication so strongly. But we know other things he said, things like shithole countries, Mexicans bringing in drugs and they're rapists. I even found a quote somewhere. There's a link in the show notes to a collection of Trump inciting violence, potentially language. And there's one in there where he said there was some kind of altercation at one of his rallies. And he said, I love the old days. When what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. That's amazing, isn't it? He's actually saying, don't you miss it when the security guards could actually physically just brutally assault somebody, so much so that they'd have to be carried out on a stretcher. That's the president, or that was the president at the time. That's crazy, isn't it? That's amazing that he would, basically be saying, I miss physical violence to people that I disagree with. Maybe, I guess I don't know what the altercation was about, but anyway, yeah. So again, I'm going to try and make this apolitical. It's not about people's far right views or anything. When thinking about, violent fringe groups that he's, and, white supremacists that he's defended through his time, as I mentioned before, KKK and the Proud Boys and QAnon. But it's amazing because, again, as I say, trying to make it apolitical, these are groups that have been shown to use violence as a tool, and any kind of endorsement or non-criticism of them or that aspect of them in some ways can validate them almost as an endorsement, especially at times when he has sort of protected them, not in a way of saying those people are amazing and I fully support them, but in a way of saying they're all people, they're doing their best, they love our country. That's some kind of validation of them. So one of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this and thinking about language and stuff, I was thinking about inciting violence, and I was thinking who incited the most violence ever. That's not how I thought about it. People have made this comparison before, and I'm interested in this comparison. Again, trying to stay away from the apoliticalness of it, but the comparison between these two figures and how they communicate, really, as a form of communication. And so that's why I did a bit of reading and some learning on Adolf Hitler and the way that he communicated his stuff in the 30s and the 40s. My main source for this was actually a book called How to Read Hitler by Neil Gregor, which is a great book. It's only a really short one. It's about a bit over 100 pages, like 120 pages, but it was really informative and interesting. And he doesn't really focus on his speeches. He does just focus on his writing on Mein Kampf and his second book. So it's not so much the same way. That's the difficulty with these comparisons, because they're definitely there, but in a similar way to Trump, as you will see, there are a lot of similarities with them. It's kind of amazing, but there really is a very incredible similarity between them in the fact that they are big, I think the word is orators, isn't it? Getting up in front of a group of people and being passionate and speaking and managing to communicate to them directly. It's not so much, other people use different forms of communication, but they really are kind of showmen in a sense. They can put on a show, be the one person in front and sort of captivate an audience, albeit for potentially, well, it's not potentially really with it, is it, with Adolf Hitler, but for, devastating consequences, horrible consequences in that sense. So he focuses on Mein Kampf, which was published in 1925, and then the second book, which was, I think he wrote in 1928 after he lost an election. It was unreleased, and I think this was interesting. It was eventually published in 1962, but only published in English for the first time in 2003, which is amazing. I wonder why it took so long and why it was then for a book, for a manuscript that was written about 75 years before then. But anyway, as I mentioned, there are a lot of comparisons between Trump and Hitler. And when you really start to go through it, you can see just how incredible it is that there's so many sort of connections between the two. Again, I'll stop mentioning it now. I'm trying to not focus on their ideas, but simply looking at the things they say and the things that they do. There's a quote in the book that says, and this is a book about Hitler, by the way, that Hitler was bearing the hallmarks of someone whose thoughts are still forming as he is speaking, that he has an uncompromising tone, that he's creating this image of destiny and fate, which is definitely something I've heard Trump do before with talking about religion and, his relationship with God and stuff. There's definitely an idea of destiny or fate with some of the decisions he's made. He announced his presence as a new species of politician. This was Adolf Hitler in the 30s. And we all know Donald Trump, drain the swamp, let's get, we're fed up of these elitists. and these politicians controlling us. He set himself up as a new species of politician, much in the same way as Hitler. A tendency to over-exaggerate and lie on key personal details. I wonder where I've heard that before. Political adversaries, not just opposition, but enemies and foes, which is very true. Even Trump, when trying to be the Republican candidate, and debating other Republicans, would go pretty harsh and pretty, gung-ho and full-on against people like Ted Cruz. He was really, mean and brutal, and he had a way of communicating in a kind of, well, I guess in a propaganda way, which is a word we'll come back to later on. But he really was. Yeah, so a lot of those are kind of very personal things, but he chooses sort of populist over partisan politics. And just for people who don't know what populism is, populism refers to a range of political stances that emphasize the idea of the people and often juxtapose this group against the elite. So it's sort of like the elite versus the people, and I represent the people, and that's the difference between me and other people. So if you hear populism, I think that's a phrase that's used a lot, but I don't really ever hear many explanations as to what it means. So there is one for you. Do, 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 do. There is an explanation of one for you. Populism. La, 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 la. I'm struggling. I know I've got so much to get through, and my brain just goes, populism, la, 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 la. Adolf Hitler is Donald Trump, do, 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 do. Maybe that'll be a ringtone for somebody one day. Another thing about Hitler is he embodies a belief in a golden mythical past, and we've heard this rhetoric again and again from Donald Trump, haven't we, that he is always harking back to a time when things were better. This relates another thing to as well, which is actually a core component of fascist ideology, is this idea of revitalization and rebirth. Just think of Trump's main campaign slogan for the whole time: make America great again. It's the again, revitalization, make it great again, rebirth. Let's bring it back from what it was. It's become something else. It needs to be transformed in some way. And that is a key component of sort of fascist ideology, which is amazing, really. And then, some of the key, if you look at some of the key ideas actually that Hitler brought to the table, issues of race and nation, military expansion and empire. If you compare all of those words with Trump, issues of race, obviously with the Mexican and Muslims, the Muslim travel ban that he had on 7 or 8 countries at that point, and nation, he's very nationalistic. He will often stand up for the Confederates flag and people waving it and their rights to wave it. He's very much about America first. In fact, America first, there is a phrase of his. Military expansion is a high interest in the military. I think at one point he was talking about having a military presence in space. Just in case, I don't know, little Martian pops along and goes, oh, wonder what's going on over here. And Trump goes, kill it now. And then, blast it apart. Empire as well. I think empire is interesting because empire maybe has meant different things to different people. And obviously to Hitler, his idea, he wasn't so much focused on sort of economic success. His was more physical. He believed in like the actual land mass of Germany in the fatherland and or the motherland. Which one is it? Is it father or motherland? I can't remember. The parent land? You can't just get away with that, can you? Legal guardian land? Nah, it's not working. The land that he loved. He was big on the actual expansion in that way. Whereas I think for empire, for somebody like Trump, would mean something like America's global economic standing, and the way, again, creating American jobs for American people, or the sanctions that he put on places like Iran and China, which were sort of political, but very much sort of economically motivated. So these ideas, again, of race, nation, military expansion and empire, I think are big key things for Trump as well. And there's other ways in which they are very closely linked as well. I mean, Hitler loved had an idealized and romanticized idea of peasant life over kind of urban culture. This pre-industrial ideal in his head was very big and strong, and you can see Trump talking about that a lot. His core support is this idea of middle America, and he's talking about the elites in Hollywood and the East and West Coast. I mean, Hitler wanted to sort of cleavage the classes. He wanted to cut them and separate them and divide them and have them infighting. And you get that sense potentially with Trump, that for his supporters, he's only really purely talking to his supporters. And for the people who don't support him, he's talking about them. He's talking about them to his supporters and the horrible things they do or the horrible people they are. That's the kind of sense you get with what he's saying. Interesting thing about one of Hitler's thoughts as well is that he said that immigration led to a loss of the most healthy members of a race. This is emigration, the idea of losing hard-working, good quality Germans, especially with the state that Germany was in when Hitler was looking at taking power. And excuse me, sorry, I was desperately trying to manage a burp that was coming out there, and I thought I managed it, but it kept rearing its head, and I don't know if it came out on the microphone anyway. But apologies, but I will not edit out any burps. In fact, I might get one of those burp machines and do a proper like a full-on proper kind of that's not a burp, is it? I don't know what that is. Distant racing car sounds. I don't know what it is. And obviously Trump has a lot of big views on immigration and emigration, on people going in and people staying out kind of thing. There's so many Hitlers talking about divisions of strong and weak people and the needs of the race having absolute priority over the needs of the individual, which I think, Trump has some kind of links to as well, with like sort of his focus on the economy. A lot of the time he's forgetting about inequality and division, and it's mainly focusing on, jobs for people, jobs for middle America. But it's the idea of the nation doing well as opposed to the individual. It's sort of, I guess it's sort of a bit of both, actually, isn't it? Sort of, you'll get your job back, but the way you'll get your job back is by America being great again. America needs to be fantastic again for you to get your job. Other things as well, like the glorification of masculine violence, I think Trump really does. You can see him when he's interacting with, different politicians, different leaders. In fact, really, I think a key one to look at is his body language and his posture around Vladimir Putin. He's really, he's strong, he's chested, and he sits in a really like an open-legged way. Like, I feel like his body language is different. There's like respect for this masculine energy that's coming off of, this leader of Russia, which is also this celebration of wartime toughness and of war itself. I think Trump has that kind of at least sympathies towards that sort of thing as well. I mean, and one of the last things I noticed in this book was an interest in war as a central tool of state politics. Obviously, that's what Hitler's famous for, isn't it? That and the bad other stuff like the Holocaust. There's not really many good points to Hitler, is there? Too much. But I think I do. I think I see that in Trump, an interest in war as a central tool of state politics. How he treated General Soleimani and the way and the assassinations he's taken out on key figures, and North Korea. That was a whole kind of fearful at that time escalation, a war of words. This is all language that resonates with violence. There's something that both of them definitely share. This resonant sharing of violence in their words, in how they talk, in how they communicate. And I want to get a little bit deeper into, the communication techniques that both Trump and Hitler use. They both have these in common, different ways of communicating. And I'm sure lots of people have done much better research and much better and more in-depth versions of this research, but I'm one person. I don't have all the time in the world, and there are so many different what's the word? My brain wanted to go I can't remember the word. Offshoots. You know what, Ben? I think what you should do is take a bit of time to really think about this one word that everyone cares about. Oh, what's this word? Or they're going, come on, Ben, it's this word. You know what the word is. Come on, Ben, just say it. Just say it. They're listening with tainted breath. I don't know what. There's a lot. I'm sorry about a lot of this podcast. Some of it's interesting and good, and some of it is a fucking mess. Getting distracted. I think that's what I was saying. There's a lot of it's not distractions, is it? Wormholes. I wanted to go down of having a melting down about this one word that doesn't mean anything for the whole podcast. What is the word? It doesn't matter. It so doesn't matter, but I can't let it go. I can't let it go. Let it go. I can't let it go. Anyway, there was loads of avenues I wanted to go down, and I couldn't go down them because it would then become too long and too convoluted, and I was getting lost with how to structure this anyway. So I won't. So I'm sure lots of people, these may just be like little jumping points for people to be interested in jumping off and doing their own research on, maybe. So if there's anything like that, jump out. Do that. So Hitler was pretty rough and mean and horrible towards Jewish people, towards the Jewish community. Some of the language he used, words like depravity, cheating, swindling, spoiling the purity of the nation and German women. There was a kind of sexual element to what he was talking about with a lot of it as well, to do with prostitution and predators as well, defiling German girls and ruining the purity of the blood. These are pretty strong things. And I think maybe not those specific words, not those specific not those specific words, but ideas like that, I think we've seen present in Trump's presidency, the way he's talked about immigrants, the way he's talked about Mexicans, the way he's talked about people. There's a lot of othering, and in fact, a lot of othering is a pretty key part to both Trump and Hitler's communication techniques when it comes to things they disagree with or disapprove of. One way of othering somebody, making them less human, is to use actual sort of crude animal imagery. A lot of the time that Hitler was talking about Jewish people, there was a lot of words like animals, predators, vermin, rats, leeches, cockroaches. They were specific kind of animals, lesser animals, ones that would sort of scavenge, ones that were, you can call them survivors, and I personally love all of those animals, but, there's very specifically like putting on a pedestal is there's like a stupidity to them as well, like a non-intelligence and almost a sense of they don't matter. They're not, these animals are sort of disposable. I guess using animal imagery also ties in as well to sort of ideas of social Darwinism, which is sort of social Darwinism is sort of applying like biological concepts of natural selection and survival of the fittest, and using those terms and not just keeping them in the realms of science, but applying them to economics and politics and sociology. I can't remember the name of the company that did this in the 80s, very famous, who would fire the bottom 10% of their workforce. Whoever the bottom 10% were who were least effective, they would get fired and a new lot would get brought in, and this was a thing they repeated. That is a form of social Darwinism. It's kind of natural selection. If you compete well and you work well, then you will thrive here, and if you don't, then you will get eaten. So that's sort of social Darwinism, but it sort of ties into using animal imagery as well, sort of creating a hierarchy of human being, and then here is the lesser human being because they are a leech, they are a cockroach, they are a predator, they are out to threaten your way of life, predator in particular. And again, we see this with Trump as well, the way he's talked about illegal immigrants as animals, and even othering sort of gangs. I think is it MS-13? That's one of the gangs. He's called them animals before. In fact, he said about them, these aren't people, they're animals. He said these aren't people, which is very explicitly, it's very explicitly kind of inflammatory language. It's very much kind of actually physically taking away their human stance away from them. Because at the end of the day, no matter what you think about other people and how they act, or the horrible things they do, or the terrible things, they're aspects and they're reflections of the worst and potentially the best of humanity. But it's of humanity. These are all people. And if we start saying that these people who do bad things, these aren't people, it's a way of it's a way of demonizing those people for sure, but it's also a way of protecting ourselves, and going, I'm not that person. That person isn't even a person. So I can continue to identify as a person, but I don't have to take on board that this is a reflection of my species, and this is a reflection of the type of person that I could be potentially one day in the right circumstances with the right genes. These are the sort of things I could be capable of doing. It's something we don't like looking at or facing. So when you start calling people animals, it's an easier way to sort of subtly interpret that image and that idea in your head. And there's other things as well. Trump's administrations have referred to people as criminal aliens. That was a phrase I heard at one point. Criminal aliens. Again, aliens, literally alien. Another species, something we don't know about. We are distancing them from human beings. It's called Assad, I think, a gas-killing animal. And again, this isn't about people's behavior. People do terrible, horrible things and should rightfully, have all of the, what's the word? The, words just keep slipping past me. The comeuppance, basically. They should not get what's coming to them, because that sounds quite violent as well. Consequences, that's the word. They should have they should feel the consequences of their actions. But again, so this isn't about people's behavior. It's just an example of the type of language used to remove someone's humanity. In fact, interestingly, I mentioned their leeches before as something that Hitler would use. I think that's specifically interesting because Hitler did see Jewish people very much as leeches, because the idea of a leech is to sort of feed off of a host. It's actually attaching itself to a host and draining it of blood. And this is core to what Hitler thought about Jewish people. They didn't have a home state, they didn't have a country, so they would leech off other people's countries. They were like a parasite in that way to Hitler. They would actually leech on other countries because they didn't have one of their own. And with the importance of country and of land mass to Hitler, of the Führerland, I'm forgetting if it's mother, father, Führer, uncle, auntie, grandfather, sibling land, I don't remember. Itchy land, scratchy land, it's going out my head. But these ideas were really important to Hitler. So if he saw Jewish people as a kind of leech because they didn't have their own place, so they needed to attach themselves to other physical places and leech off of them in that way. Leech off of other people's cultures, which is one reason why he presumed that they were internationalists, they were globalists. If somebody was a globalist or an internationalist, free markets going around, the economic ways of moving around the world and free movement of people and all these sorts of ideas. He saw this very much as a Jewish idea. And of course, Hitler was big on homeland, didn't like that idea with immigration and stuff like that. And this ties into why what Hitler's developing view of Germany was, because sort of in the beginning or towards the end of the 19th century, there was a kind of transfer of property to urban classes from peasant classes around that sort of time. So I guess when Hitler was born and coming up in his infancy, he saw this sort of thing happening a lot, that peasant classes were losing their wealth and their property to urban classes, and increasingly getting marginalized out of cities and such. And this sort of fostered this belief that the economy was only there to serve the individual, not the nation. This was a kind of, I guess, the zeitgeist of that time, that we are in Germany, but Germany is about protecting the sort of individuals and the economic individuals rather than the nation as a whole. And so the working class became more and more neglected, which created more social inequality. And so that grew. And then the working class, became alienated from the nation. And in Hitler's view, this made them susceptible to Marxism. And Marxism shares ideas with internationalism, pacifism, human equality, sort of ideas like this. Again, internationalism, the Jewish link there. And this eroded the workers' sort of willingness to actually fight. And so, the population became uncommitted to the nation. And then, Germany, because of this, because of the internal divisions and because of a general sense of, a lack of willing to fight and ideas of pacifism, of human equality and internationalism, he's saying this weakened the effort in World War One. This actually had an impact on how people treated World War One. And then, after that Treaty of Versailles, which, led by America, again, America sort of in his sort of views a kind of code for Jewishness, and because of, the links with the press, links with globalism, you can see how these things sort of entice and engulf inside themselves. One thing I find really interesting about that version of events, though, and that story, is that actually we can see a kind of similar sort of huge wealth inequality today that preceded this view in Hitler's idea of how they treated World War One and therefore how the country was shaped over the next decades. But we see, more centibillionaires and more billionaires than ever, and the wealth divide between the poorest and the richest becoming bigger. That 12 people own as much as half of the population of the planet. The power transfer as well, and the wealth transfer that's been happening during COVID, job losses, food banks, nurses who are public sector workers having to rely on food banks. We see it now. I don't know what that means, all of that I just said, but I feel like there's a sense in how Trump can be here and Trump can be, present in the times that we are in, because I don't think Trump just comes up in a vacuum. I don't think he just says the right words and he gets in. I think Trump has been sort of a Trump-like figure has been bubbling under the surface for maybe the past decade or so. The conditions were being created where Trump could come to power. And, I'm just interested in the way that ties in with Hitler's worldview and how he approached it to the worldview we see now. And maybe people do find that there are links between those things anyway. Anyway, back to I just want to get back to animal imagery, because I do want to try and wrap this up soonish. That Hitler believed anti-Semitism as well was scientific, that there was a biological difference, and this relates to that sort of othering, and this relates to why he would sort of treat them almost as a different species and use words like animal and rats and leech and cockroaches, because it was, in his mind, sort of biologically accurate that Jews were like a different kind of species, that they had different biological makeups, which is very interesting, but also hugely scary as well. And in fact, that ties in, I think, to Trump's government in a sense, because they do did tend to be kind of anti-scientific as well, and struggle with the science of climate change and all other manner of things and difficult things like that. That was part one of my sort of talk about, I don't know, Hitler and Trump and all sorts of stuff and violent language and all those things. Part two will be out next week. If you could subscribe, that would be great. If you could comment, if you could leave a review, that would be really genuinely wonderful. You can email me at savbalpod@gmail.com and let me know if this sort of thing is good for you or bad for you, or if you've got ideas of future guests, or if you want to be a guest, let me know. Just chat to me about that sort of stuff. There's an Instagram, Savage Balance Podcast. There's a Twitter, SavBalPod. There's a website that is savbalpod.com. There's plenty more stuff I could say, but I'll leave that there for now. Enjoy this episode. Well, it's a bad time to say, isn't it? You already have. Or you already haven't. Either way, you've listened to it now. Enjoy next week's episode if you enjoyed this week's, and I'll see you then. Look after yourself. Take it easy. Bye for now.